All right, so thank you very much, everybody, for joining this evening. Again, my name is Gabe Turan. I am a city council member for District 2 for the City of Oxnard. And I want to thank you for coming out for tonight's presentation by our Ventura County Watershed Protection District and the City of Oxnard. And I want to first apologize if I'm really washed out. This time of day in my office where I'm meeting you from, the sun comes directly on me. So I apologize if I have lines from my blinds here, but that's what we're working with tonight. So thank you again for joining. And we want to do some introductions before we get to our presentation. And so first and foremost, I would like to thank some of our electeds who are here tonight. We have County Supervisor for District 1, Supervisor Matt Levee, and you can see him there. And he has committed to being here this evening to observe and listen to some of the discussion and take that forward as we continue with planning for SCR-1. I'd also like to thank Councilmember Bert Perello for District 1 within the City of Oxnard. And you can see him there waving as well. And he also will be here to observe and listen and be able to take notes as we move forward. And I being in District 2, Councilmember Perello and I and Supervisor Levee, we all have geographical areas that abut the levees. And so we certainly have an interest in making sure that the voices are heard and that our staff who are here are really thanked for the work they're putting into this, but also we're able to have some great dialogue about where we'd like to go with this. So now I'm going to turn over to our Ventura County Public Works staff to introduce themselves for tonight's presentation. So I'll turn it over first to Gerard. And I think you're on mute, Gerard. There you go.
Thank you very much, Councilman Turan. My name is Gerard Kapusik, and I am the Strategic Resiliency Manager of the Ventura County Watershed Protection. And more on point for tonight's topic, I am the manager of the district's levee certification program. I apologize for my camera. I can see you, but just before going on, I got a flashing light on my computer and something's wrong with my camera, so you can't see me. But that's probably good because really the focus tonight should be on the presentation, not on any one of us and the impact that we have on it. So we're joined, my colleagues from the Watershed Protection District, Angela Bonfilio Allen, who will field the lion's share of our presentation and answer questions because the focus of this meeting is on preparing the notice of preparation for the upcoming environmental impact report under CEQA for the state of California and under NEPA for the federal government, because this was a federally authorized and core constructed levee turned over to the Watershed Protection District for perpetual operation and maintenance from that point in time. In addition to Angela is my colleague, Kirk Norman, who is the project design engineer in our design and construction section of Watershed Protection, who is the principal go-to person in terms of coordinating project design amongst all of our staff and with the firm Tetra Tech, who is consulting engineering firm. That's the design firm the Watershed Protection District retained to essentially prepare the design documents for this levee rehabilitation project. And we've also retained Aspen Environmental as the environmental document preparation consultant, which of course is the basic part of tonight's meeting about the preparation of the EIR.
Thank you for that, Gerard. And so we have Kirk Norman and Angela, as Gerard had mentioned. Thank you for introducing your great staff there. And I'm going to go ahead now and turn it over to our City of Oxnard staff. And we'll start with Mr. Brian Yanes.
Hello, Brian Yanes, Acting Public Works Director. I'm glad to be on this Zoom call here and interested on the levee, as we've been talking about this for quite some time. And thanks, Gerard and Angela, for keeping us informed on the levee and progress of the levee for years. So appreciate that. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Tatiana Arnaud, City Engineer for the City of Oxnard, and I've been working with Angela, Kirk, and Gerard here on this project. They're primarily doing most of the work. I've been doing just a lot of listening, but I'm here to answer any questions as they relate to the city's part of this.
And hello, everyone. I'm Scott Kolwitz, the Planning and Environmental Services Manager over at the City of Oxnard. I'm here mostly in a support capacity and a listening capacity for the city. And I also wanted to apologize for the backlighting that's happening in my office. It's making my face quite dark. If I do need to speak, hopefully I'll be a little bit brighter as the meeting goes on. So with that, thank you for having me.
Great, thank you very much, Scott. So he has backlighting and I have front lighting. So combined, we'd have really good lighting, I guess. So, all right, so thank you very much. The last thing I'll say before we start our presentation is you'll note that on the bottom of your screen, or if you're on a mobile device, you'll see it possibly when you tap your screen. There is a Q&A function. And if you click on that Q&A button, you will have a box pop up and that will allow you to type in questions. And I'm going to encourage folks to type in questions as they come to you as you go through the presentation or as we have discussion. And the reason for that being twofold. Number one, the staff who are here as panelists right now, they will see those questions come up and they can actually answer those questions in real time by typing out an answer. Or if there's a question that's a little bit more complex, we can mark that we'll answer it verbally. And when the time comes for discussion, we will answer it verbally and have discussion around that. There will also be time later for if you would like, if something has been asked, you want elaboration on it, we can look at that as well. But I encourage folks to use the Q&A function for that reason. And also, as you note that we are recording this session, this will be made available to the public after the fact. And then we will also make the Q&A questions that were asked and then answered. We will make those available to folks after the fact as well to review. And so that's why I encourage doing it, because then it'll be something you can refer to later or share with folks later who weren't able to be here tonight. All right. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here, and we will take the next 20 minutes or so to view this presentation that was put together by our Ventura County Public Works staff. And we will come back after this and go into discussion Q&A.
Santa Clara River Levee, SCR-1 improvements upstream of Highway 101, California Environmental Quality Act, CEQA public scoping presentation. Welcome to the Ventura County Public Works Agency Watershed Protection Public Scoping Presentation for the Santa Clara River Levee Rehabilitation Project, also known as SCR-1. This presentation serves to comply with the requirements of the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA. Who is Watershed Protection? Watershed Protection is a dependent county special district governed by the Board of Supervisors and administratively housed in the Ventura County Public Works Agency. Our mission is to protect life, property, and community infrastructure from flood events, improve water resources management, and enhance the health and natural function of watersheds in Ventura County. Watershed Protection was created by the state legislature in 1944. Watershed Protection's management area is approximately 1,800 square miles and is divided into 4 zones. We are responsible for 3 major watershed zones, including Callegas Creek, Santa Clara River, and the Ventura River. The project discussed in this presentation is specific to the Santa Clara River watershed. This presentation will discuss a proposed project concerning the Santa Clara River Levee. The Santa Clara River Levee, along the southeast bank of the Santa Clara River, is unincorporated Ventura County, between the cities of Ventura and Oxnard. The approximately 4.72-mile-long levee begins at Highway 101 and continues north to South Mountain. The levee was originally constructed by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers in 1961 and has been owned, operated, and maintained by Watershed Protection since 1963. The levee protects commercial, residential, and industrial properties in low-lying areas within the Santa Clara River floodplain. The purpose of this scoping period is to inform the public about the SCR-1 project and provide information on the environmental review process as required by the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA. Scoping provides the public an opportunity to give input on potential issues that the Environmental Impact Report, or EIR, should address. Input can include specific environmental issues, mitigation methods to reduce environmental impacts, and potential alternatives to project actions. This public scoping is being held as required as part of the environmental review process under the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA, a state law, and the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA, a federal law. The CEQA and NEPA review processes will involve analyzing the proposed project's potential impacts on a variety of resources in both the natural and built environment. Any potentially significant impacts will be discussed in the Environmental Impact Report, or EIR, and measures identified to reduce impacts to the greatest extent feasible. Obtaining permits is also a crucial aspect of environmental review, as permits ensure project activities are carried out in accordance with applicable laws. Before we get into the proposed project, let's discuss a little about levees. A levee system is a flood control structure engineered to contain and convey flood flows to protect adjacent structures and the public from flood risks and damage. A levee includes an embankment, a top or crown, side slopes and toes, which are the points where the levee slopes meet the bottom of the riverbed or the land side of the levee. There's also an allowance between the top of the water surface elevation and the top of crown that we refer to as freeboard. There are several components that make up the SCR-1 levee system. The top left photo shows the embankment, which is made of earthen material and is above ground, generally with a rock-covered side slope along the riverside of the levee. The land side of the levee is earthen. The riverside slope in the top right photo consists of rock armor protection designed to protect the levee from the erosive river flows. This rock slope protection extends below ground, which is known as toe down. There is an earthen maintenance road along the levee toe, which also functions as the mandated minimum 15-foot wide vegetation-free zone that enables unobstructed inspection of levee integrity. As can be seen on the middle right photo, the levee system contains occasional side drainage or interior drainage penetrations, such as a pipe or concrete box that directs flows from land behind the levee into the river. These side drainage penetrations may have a closure to prevent water from backing up into the side drainage from the riverside. The levee crosses beneath Highway 101 in the middle left photo. The levee also has 75 rock groins protruding toward the river perpendicular to the levee, an example of which appears in the bottom photo. The proposed levee improvements would extend from Highway 101 to Central Avenue Drain, where the project would then turn away from the existing levee and southeasterly towards Vineyard Avenue, as shown in the green alignment. No improvements are proposed upstream of Central Avenue Drain, shown in red. However, watershed protection would continue to maintain this portion of the levee, consistent with all flood protection operational best management practices, as it does currently. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers constructed the SCR-1 levee in 1961. The levee was damaged during high flows in 1969 and 1983. In 2005, the flood disasters associated with Hurricane Katrina drove the need for a nationwide levee certification program that was led by the Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA. In 2009, an evaluation of the SCR-1 levee was conducted as a response to the Provisionally Accredited Levee (PAL) Systems Program, and structural levee deficiencies were found. Watershed Protection pursued a funding partnership with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to further study the levee in each year, beginning 2014 through 2020, but the request was denied each year. We are hopeful that our 2021 request to Congresswoman Brownley and Senator Feinstein for $200,000 towards that study will be approved. In February 2018, Watershed Protection secured nearly $1.3 million in state grant funds from the California Department of Water Resources, or DWR, to continue technical studies, field surveys, fieldwork, prepare design drawings, and initiate the environmental review process. Some of you may remember that in October 2017, Watershed Protection held a public meeting to inform the community of the project and planned work. Feedback from that meeting led to a year-long stakeholder process from April 2018 through April 2019 to explore the feasibility of incorporating additional community-desired betterments into the project. Here is the FEMA floodplain map of the SCR-1 levee area. The red line shows the alignment of the levee. The area delineated by a navy blue line is the area protected by the levee, and the hatched area shows the projected 1% annual chance, or 100-year flood event zone, without proposed levee improvements. So, why is this project needed? First, the levee is 60 years old and well beyond its capital service life of 50 years. Second, the levee has structural deficiencies. FEMA requires the structural deficiencies to be corrected before the levee can be certified and accredited. Most importantly, upgrading the levee would ensure it protects the local community from the 1% annual chance flood. Let's explore the SCR-1 levee deficiencies a bit further. There is vegetation within 15 feet of the levee that needs to be removed to comply with U.S. Army Corps of Engineers standards, as shown in the top left photo. The upper right photo demonstrates inadequate rock quality and rock size to protect the earthen embankment from erosion. The bottom diagram demonstrates insufficient toe down and rock groin depths, making the levee vulnerable to undermining by river flows. Lastly, hydraulic modeling and analysis have indicated that a small portion of the levee near Highway 101 has inadequate freeboard, or height above floodwaters. This means that during a 1% annual chance flood event, the Santa Clara River could overtop the levee crown in that area. This map shows the extent and location of the deficiencies. The red line indicates where the levee toe-down protection is inadequate based on the analysis of potential scour depths. The area noted in orange, immediately upstream of US 101, does not have sufficient freeboard. The yellow line indicates where vegetation removal needs to occur. This figure shows that the beginning of the levee south of and beneath Highway 101 will consist of grouted rock riprap. A reinforced concrete flood wall will be constructed under the freeway to raise the levee height. At this south end of the levee, the new toe will be up to 20 feet deeper than it is now to effectively protect against scour and undermining by the river. North of Highway 101, the proposed levee design transitions from grouted rock riprap to 8-foot thick soil cement surface armoring. Soil cement is a mixture of cement and native soil. The cement content creates a strong surface that would not require rock armoring. Watershed Protection selected soil cement rather than rock riprap armoring for most of the levee alignment because it can be placed at a steeper slope and therefore within a smaller work area than is required for the rock, which reduces the project impact to biological resources within the Santa Clara River. Soil cement cannot be placed beneath the Highway 101 bridge due to the lack of suitable space to operate the associated machinery. The proposed levee toe north of Highway 101 would be up to 27 feet deeper than it is currently to protect against undermining by the river. Along the Rio del Sol Steam Academy, the soil cement may be covered with a soil overlay planted with California native grass species. The next slide demonstrates additional features that may be installed on the levee alongside the school, depending on the feasibility and available funding. Based on stakeholder input, and with strong leadership and collaborative funding contributions toward design work from the Rio School District, an accessible amphitheater, bird blinds, educational kiosks, asphalt bike trail, and grassy soil overlay are being designed for the portion of the levee adjacent to the Rio del Sol Steam Academy. The design includes a gateway on school property to connect the school to the levee. The design is unprecedented in Ventura County and subject to review and approval by the Corps. As the federal agency that originally constructed the levee, the Corps determines what modifications of the levee are permissible. If the Corps approves incorporation of educational betterments onto the levee, construction may proceed subject to funding and agreement by the school district or other responsible government entity to maintain all non-levee features in perpetuity. This figure shows the new levee segment to be constructed between Central Avenue Drain and Faro Basin. The section where the soil cement levee curves away from the Santa Clara River will be reinforced with an additional 200-foot-long layer of 1-ton rock riprap. The first 1,050 feet of new levee segment along the earthen open channel portion of Central Avenue Drain will consist of 8-foot-thick soil cement to best protect the open earthen channel. Beginning where the Central Avenue Drain transitions to a buried pipe culvert at approximately station 51400, the levee will be reinforced with ungrouted rock riprap for the final 2,750 feet. The new levee segment terminates on high ground in an agricultural field immediately west of Vineyard Avenue. Among the first steps in the environmental review process are surveys to determine the baseline or existing conditions. Cultural and biological surveys were completed in 2017 through 2019 for the SCR-1 project. As required by state law, Watershed Protection conducted cultural and archaeological surveys and coordinated closely with Native American tribes in the area to ensure that the proposed project would not adversely impact important cultural, historical, or tribal resources. Consultation with Native American tribes is a requirement of Assembly Bill 52, or AB 52, which was passed in 2016, to evaluate project impacts on California Native American cultural resources such as artifacts, historical lands, and sacred places. AB 52 consultation has been conducted for the SCR-1 project, and the NEPA lead agency, which is the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, or Corps, consulted with the State Historic Preservation Officer. Historical records were reviewed from the California Historical Records Information System South Central Coastal Information Center, the Native American Heritage Commission's Sacred Lands File, and available online historical databases. No resources were identified within the project alignment, but several were identified within half a mile. As such, it's been determined that there is potential for deeply buried archaeological resources. The Cultural and Archaeological Pedestrian or Walking Survey completed for the SCR-1 project did not identify any previously recorded eligible archaeological or historic resources, and no significant artifacts were found within the SCR-1 project area. Consultation with the Barbareño Ventureño Band of Mission Indians identified one prehistoric burial within half a mile of the project alignment, but no other previously recorded tribal cultural resources were otherwise identified within the project area. Various biological surveys were completed in 2017, including an assessment of the quality of the Santa Clara River through use of the California Rapid Assessment Method, which determined that the attributes of the Santa Clara River are generally high quality. The Jurisdictional Waters and Wetlands Delineation determined that the project area supports California Department of Fish and Wildlife, or CDFW State Jurisdictional Habitat, Regional Water Quality Control Board waters of the state, core jurisdictional wetlands, and core non-wetland waters. Vegetation and wildlife surveys were conducted, including protocol surveys for the federally and state-listed leased Bell's Vireo. Several special status bird species were identified, but no federal or state-listed plants. Based on this preliminary evaluation, the proposed SCR-1 project may result in significant impacts and therefore an Environmental Impact Report, or EIR, is the appropriate CEQA document. We anticipate the EIR will focus on the issue areas of air quality, biological resources, noise, and transportation impacts associated with the project. The EIR will evaluate in detail these potentially significant impacts. Regarding air quality, the EIR will address construction, operation, and maintenance of the proposed project, which would generate pollutant emissions and fugitive dust. The proposed project has the potential to violate regional air quality standards or contribute to an existing or projected air quality violation. There may also be a risk to construction workers of contracting valley fever. This is a respiratory illness caused by inhalation of disturbed soil containing a species of fungus suspected to occur in Ventura County. With respect to biological resources, the proposed project would include construction and operation activities adjacent to the Santa Clara River, which could result in significant impacts to common wildlife, nesting birds, special status or rare wildlife species, and special status plant species. Construction and operation could also directly or indirectly impact jurisdictional waters, wetlands, environmentally sensitive habitat areas, critical habitat, and wildlife movement. Noise caused by construction equipment could potentially exceed existing noise levels at sensitive receptors, such as residential areas and schools. Operations may involve activities and equipment similar to construction, and thus may also have the potential to exceed noise thresholds. The proposed project may also increase the vehicle miles traveled due to the extent of heavy equipment and vehicles required for construction. Based on the SCR-1 project site or project characteristics, it is anticipated that impacts for many issue areas would either not occur, be under the significance thresholds, or are readily mitigatable. As listed here, some environmental issues would result in no impact because the proposed project would not be in the same area where these resources are known to occur. For example, there are no coastal beaches or sand dunes near the SCR-1 alignment. Other environmental issues would be mitigated with standard measures to avoid significant impacts. These include cultural and tribal cultural resources. Standard measures or environmental commitments would be incorporated into the project, including cultural resources monitoring and procedures for the inadvertent discovery of human remains. Additionally, environmental commitments have been developed to reduce the potential for significant impacts from hazardous materials and waste. These impacts are associated with the use of construction equipment and fuels, and the potential to encounter contaminated soils associated with the nearby agricultural lands or contaminated groundwater during construction dewatering. The environmental commitments would include implementing a soil and groundwater management plan, including testing soil for pesticide contamination. The proposed project is anticipated to have less than significant or no impact to these additional environmental issues. For many of these issue areas, impacts are expected to be localized or short-term, or not occur at all. For example, the proposed project would not result in any impacts to education because no schools or libraries would be relocated, removed, or experience changes in demand. Note that some of these issues are not necessarily related to the natural environment, such as utilities, law enforcement, and transportation. These issues are still analyzed as part of the environmental review process because they are related to the human-built environment and the well-being of the public. The EIR will include discussions of all environmental issues with less than significant or no impacts and provide justification for their significance conclusions. This flowchart presents the environmental review process under CEQA and the anticipated schedule. The initial pre-scoping meeting was held on October 2017 before the preliminary evaluation of potential impacts. We are currently at the second step of the EIR process, having issued a notice of preparation for an EIR and conducting a virtual scoping meeting. After this step, all public comments received during the 30-day public scoping period will be considered, and substantive comments will be integrated into the draft EIR analysis. Another public meeting will be held after publication of the draft EIR, with a public review period of 45 days. Finally, the last step of the EIR process will involve responding to those public comments and publishing the final EIR, including a mitigation monitoring program. Following publication of the final EIR, the Ventura County Board of Supervisors will hold a public hearing to consider public input and ultimately decide if the SCR-1 project will be approved or denied, and adopt the final EIR and mitigation monitoring program as compliant with CEQA. If the proposed project is approved, construction can begin, assuming a funding source has been identified, and only after all permits have been obtained. Construction would be monitored to ensure compliance with all adopted mitigation measures. Because the SCR-1 levee was originally built by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and federal permits are required to alter the levee, an environmental review process will also be completed to satisfy the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA. The Corps has determined that an environmental assessment, or EA, will be the appropriate document under NEPA. It is anticipated the draft EA will be prepared following compilation of the draft EIR, and much of the analysis will mirror or rely on the information contained in the draft EIR. This slide presents the anticipated schedule of major milestones to complete the design and environmental review process for the proposed project. To date, biological and cultural technical studies and geotechnical investigation have been completed to support the project's preliminary design and environmental evaluation. The information obtained from these studies and investigations, along with comments received during the public scoping period, will be used to support preparation of the draft EIR, which is expected to be available for public review by winter 2022. As described in the previous slide, a draft EA will be prepared along with the draft EIR. This draft EA is expected to be completed by summer 2022 and available for public review in fall 2022. Public comments received in response to the draft EIR and draft EA will support the final EIR and final EA anticipated to be completed in winter 2023. Construction of the SCR-1 project is contingent upon watershed protection securing funding, such that the time frame for construction cannot be stated at this time. Public comments may be sent by mail or email to the addresses showing in this slide and on the notice of preparation. Comments must be received or postmarked by July 27, 2021. Please focus all comments on the scope and content of the EIR, including environmental concerns, mitigation, and alternatives to project components. Please take note that all comments, names, and addresses provided will become public information. For more information on the scoping process or environmental review process, please contact Watershed Protection at the address, email address, or phone number provided in this slide. Thank you for taking the time to view this presentation and participate in the CEQA process.
All right, so thank you again to our Ventura County Public Works folks for putting that all together. That was a really well done video, and I think it provided a lot of information, and I hope folks will share that appreciation. So we had a couple of questions come in during the presentation, and as a reminder for folks who were here when we started the video and those who've joined us afterwards, we have the Q&A function that you'll see at the bottom of your screen. If you're on a mobile device, you may have to tap your screen and then you'll see your functions come up. But there is a Q&A function, and it says Q&A, and it has a little 2 chat bubbles next to each other. And we ask that you utilize that function so that way we can keep all the questions in one spot. We may be able to answer them through written comment or verbally. But after this meeting is over, not only is this meeting being recorded, but we can share those answers after the fact. All right, so our first question here that we had come in is from James and then from Joey. But first, I'm going to turn it over to our public works staff to see if they have any additional items I'd like to use to frame this conversation moving forward. And I know that Gerard touched on some a little bit earlier, but we've had folks join us as well. So I'll turn it over to them for just a moment.
Okay, so I think Gerard is going to take the first question. Gerard, are you ready? You're muted right now.
Yes, Angela, thanks. I am ready to take that question. So let me make sure that I scroll back down to the question to make sure that I captured it here. So with respect to proceeding in the 2018 to 19 Betterments and Desirable project, we established constraints and guidance regarding how we would deal with betterments and desirables. And it's important to note that any betterment or desirable that proposed has to be matched against protecting against floods. So no betterment and desirable would be allowed to move forward that would cause any problem. And none of these are being identified for that. Secondarily, it was clear that any entity desiring to add a non-flood protection benefit on the levee, whether it be a bike trail, whether it be some other amenity, would be asked to contribute towards the design costs and ultimately determine the ownership and long-term operation and maintenance of that. The only betterment and desirable that was considered through that process, of which there were contributions towards the design costs, were the educational betterments. And therefore, for that reason, the County Public Works Director, in evaluating inclusion of them in the 60% core submittal, felt that was a good faith effort towards developing those betterments. And further, if we did not submit at least the conceptual design of those betterments to the Corps, we would not know whether the Corps would find them acceptable should at some time in the future the school district or any other entity engage in actual construction of those educational betterments. So that is why they are included in the current development of the 60% design submittal will be going to the Corps in December. No other betterment that was considered or any other sponsoring party or individuals indicated a willingness at that point in time to provide funding for moving those betterments forward, which does not mean that at some point in the future that may not happen. With respect to the bike trail, as I think the questioner already knows, the City of Oxnard has an established Santa Clara River Master Trail Plan, which envisions co-locating a bike trail along the top of the SCR-1 levee. And we have been collaborating with the city and have done the best we can to accommodate in our design the ability of the city in the future as it secures funding for both construction and operation of that trail to do so. The Board of Supervisors has a long established policy that governs co-location of utilization of flood control projects. First and foremost, that's ground and doing no harm to the flood protection function of the project, which is what we are specifically by law required to be responsible for. And then secondly, we try to identify how we can best do that. And Angela's just put up a slide which gives a sense of the ongoing planning regionally beyond the City of Oxnard's planning under the active transportation plan, which is outside of my ken. And I know there are staff members here in both the city or in the city that can address that in terms of the status of that, which seems to be the appropriate vehicle to coalesce not only the trail, potential trail, a bike trail along the SCR-1 levee, but how does that fit into the broader regional plans for a trail from the Ventura County line to the ocean along the Santa Clara River. And so we've done the best we can to accommodate the design of our project, the potential for those uses to occur under the guidance and channeling of the board policy and the requirement that the Corps of Engineers would have to approve any such proposal. From our preliminary discussions with the Corps, we have described to them what a potential bike trail might look like in accordance with the city specifications. And the Corps indicated with the caveat that, of course, we will reserve the right to comment on whether it would be approved until specific formulations of that design are submitted to us. But conceptually, they did not see a particular problem with that as long as there were no damages to the structural integrity of the levee. So I'm hopeful that that's answered to that question.
All right, and is that in response to the first question, Gerard, from Mr. Danza?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yeah, and he also touched on the answer to the second question, bike path on the levee. So the Board of Supervisors, the County Board of Supervisors, is going to be hearing an item from our sister agency, the Public Works Agency, Roads and Transportation Department. What I meant to say was sister department. And they're going to be engaging in a consultant contract with Alta Planning, which also did the plan for the City of Oxnard Santa Clara River Trail Master Plan. So that's going before the board next Tuesday. And that's for the active transportation plan for unincorporated Ventura County. There is also the City of Ventura's plan, which is getting off the ground, and the City of Oxnard's plan also getting off the ground with public engagement scheduled for the fall and winter of this upcoming season. So there are many ways for the public to engage with both cities, with the county, and also with the Ventura County Transportation Commission. Although from what I understand, their comprehensive transportation plan is more of a long-range plan, like a 30-year plan. And the active transportation plans appear to be shorter-term plans. And they basically open the door to funding through Caltrans active transportation grant program. I understand that the County of Ventura and also the City of Ventura have already applied for other projects under the 2020 grant program round. So those should be soon receiving funding and should be moving forward. So there is a very excellent chance that once the projects get into the plan, and if you make yourselves heard during that process, that they could be elevated to higher priority status and implemented more rapidly. So while watershed protection itself isn't necessarily carrying forward the actual bike path, we are laying the canvas for the bike path. The top of the levee will be 16 feet wide to accommodate 2 directions of traffic, and then an extra foot on the riverside to accommodate a safety fence. And at that point, the levee will be ready. Once we construct it, once we find the money to construct the levee, then the levee will be ready for a bike path to be placed atop it. However, it should be known and understood that there's no way that we can construct this entire levee all at once. We have to cut it into bite-sized chunks because, you know, it's just too expensive to do it all in one fell swoop. So I don't know exactly where we're going to start, whether it's from the downstream end or the upstream end, but as we progress, little sections of a bike path could follow at a time.
Councilman Tran, if I could just add a couple of points to fill out the response to the question. So I'm not sure whether the questionnaire comes up with the 10% of our funding can be designated for that, but regardless of that point, here's the fundamental problem. If we take dollars away from flood protection, from flood protection to enhance non-flood protection betterments, as desirable, as good as everyone would like to see them, it means that much less for flood protection. So every project in which we have involved enhancements to non-flood protection components, we've relied on grant funding to help us do that, because otherwise we'd be cannibalizing our existing funding base authorized by the voters for flood protection purposes. And we've always tried to construct our grants to include additional benefits and have been quite successful at that. Most recently being the DWR's approval of a $3.1 million grant towards the completion of the SCR-3 levee, which has a $600,000 component for habitat enhancement upstream in the Santa Clara River from that area, because that is the way the state constructed that grant. So we essentially provided for 2 outcomes: flood protection and habitat enhancements. And that's the kind of funding cobbling that we have to put together through this process. Secondarily, Angela's point is that no trail along the levee can be built until the underlying levee is rehabbed. And it's important to understand the dimensions of this project. This project will cost the entire nearly 5 million levee somewhere from 60 million to 75 million, and that's at $20, right? So it really depends on when we start construction of each component of the project, what those eventual costs will be. So this is an extremely large, complex, and expensive project. So until segments of the levee are constructed, there could be no bike trail on top of those areas. Otherwise, public monies would be used to construct the bike trail. The bike trail would have to be dismantled when we did the levees. Public monies would be used to construct the levee, and then public monies again would have to be used to construct the bike trail over the removed levee. So it's impossible for us to have the trails, regardless of people's desire, to occur faster than the underlying construction of the segment of SCR-1 that we were able to get successful funding. And tonight's meeting is less about funding than it is about the environmental impacts. The Watershed Protection District ethos is where we can incorporate into our core mission of flood protection additional benefits that coexist, complement, and supplement flood protection, we do. but it's greatly dependent on the funding sources, the constraints, and the balancing act that will have to take place in any given project or any given component of a project.
All right, thank you very much for that. And I think that adds some context, and as a reminder that we are here for that purpose of or this phase of work that's happening with the levee right now. Were you going to say something additional, Kirk?
No, I think Gerard covered that pretty well.
Okay.
I would like to say something. Can you see the map on the screen right now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so this is a map of the levee downstream of Highway 101. And in 2018, I believe, we completed construction of levee improvements for Reach 1, Reach 2, and Reach 3. So that segment is actually ripe for putting a bike path on it. That could be the first segment of bike path that goes in. And for sure, during the various active transportation plan processes, we will be providing input to that extent, that we strongly encourage I guess it would be the City of Oxnard's active transportation plan and perhaps the unincorporated Ventura County plan to incorporate this and to implement it as quickly as possible. In addition, for Reach 4, we are probably going to go to construction within the next year. And so that will be ripe maybe in 2 years for a bike path to be placed on it. And again, that levee improvement was designed to accommodate the addition of a bike path. It was made wide enough on the top to accommodate two-way traffic.
Okay, thank you for that. Moving on to the next question we have from Nina Danza. She asks, does the project use climate change prediction for shorter, more intense storm events? How is flood level computed, especially under the 101 bridge, where an increase of levee height is proposed?
Right. So we did consider climate change from the aspect of sea level rise. Sea level rise at that location based on the county RMA planning is about 1.5 meters. And this is far enough upstream, so it's not impacted by that. In addition, the 100-year flow rate is 226,000 cubic feet per second. Like Gerard likes to say, a cubic foot is about the size of a basketball. So that's 225,000 basketballs per second passing any point in the river. And we increased the flow rate to accommodate a flow rate of 250,000. It's about 10% more than a 100-year storm. And in addition to that, it has the FEMA required freeboard, generally 3 feet along the levee and 4 feet through the bridge.
All right, thank you. And the next one is from Ron Bodorov. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. A levee top bike trail has been strongly promoted by several organizations. Why is such a trail not included in the plan for SCR-1? And I think we touched on that a bit already, but if someone wants to just reiterate real quickly on that.
I will. I would answer that question this way. We have in our plan the accommodation of the trail for those trails to occur in the future as the time is ripe, the funding is secured, and the long-term operation and maintenance of components or the entire trail is determined.
All right, and I would invite our City of Oxnard staff to touch on this one a little bit too, as far as the City of Oxnard's role and what's been written so far or worked on so far in planning for such a path for SCR-1.
So it's been mentioned already, we do have the 2011 Santa Clara River document that touches on this bike path. In addition to that, We do have our active transportation grant, which the public outreach will be beginning this probably closer to winter of this year. There will be a website that will talk to this. This bike path will be included in that plan. We also have a local roads safety plan that will touch on it as well. And, our folks over at the county have touched on this a little bit, but we do have to be careful with the timing of when we request funding for such a bike path, because we are at the mercy of the levee improvements coming in. So the city does intend on applying for grants. However, we intend on doing it when it makes sense to do so, because most grants have very specific timelines that we need to meet. And so the only way to meet those timelines is if, the levee improvements come in first and foremost. And so at least that's where the city stance is at this time.
Great, thank you for that, Tatiana. Our next question is, how is the project resilient under the predicted increased climate change storm intensities?
Right, so we covered the parameters that were evaluated to accommodate future climate change. And let's see, I understand, let's see, resiliency is somewhat, how is it, what it does is we're increasing the tow down in the river to prevent scour and undermining of the levee, which allows it to stay in place without repair. And the other thing I would add to that is that it's that when repairs are made, that the soil cement levee will allow crews to get to the areas that need to be repaired safely.
All right, thank you for that, Kirk. And as a quick follow-up, it sounds like if given climate change as an additional layer, if we were to have, rather than like a 1% type of storm event, let's say that happened multiple times within a short time frame, whether it's 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, it sounds like the engineering has happened to be able to address any damage or structural needs that the levee may have after that event, in anticipation of another event happening. Is that correct?
Right. In fact, the Army Corps, they do periodic inspections in a case where there might be a soil overlay in the future. Critical areas like where it turns up along Central Avenue Drain and levee penetrations would need to be exposed so they could be inspected.
Councilman Tran, if I could chime in on this to build on the point you raised. The simple answer to your question is we've done the best we can to plan for every contingency that we can conceive at this point in time and that can be afforded. No infrastructure system is ever built to guard against 100% of 100% type of event. There are always trade-offs and compromises, but we've done the best we can. The best way to put that into an analogy is that the most recent thinking about climate change in terms of impacts to weather in Southern California is our baseline condition of drought will get worse, but when we do have storms, their intensities will become materially larger and impactful. And this gets back to the basketball analogy about the situation. The reason the basketball analogy is important is that water, unlike a gas, is uncompressible. And so there is great hydraulic force, strength in each one of those basketballs full of water. And if 250,000 of those basketballs full of uncompressible water, hydraulic force, hits the bank of the river that's unprotected, or hits a toe of the levee that's not deep enough, or is compromised by the rock size in the existing levee being insufficient to absorb and cushion that flow from the levee breaching, you're going to have severe problems. And so as Kirk has outlined in terms of the design parameters, and as Angela has outlined in terms of the best science we have about climate change induced impacts, we're trying to deal with that. Fortunately, this levee, while it's on the river, is significantly upstream from the coast itself. If it were closer to the coast, there might be slightly different calculations and measures taken. But for the reasons we've outlined and the quantitative descriptors we've given you, we've complied the best we can with what we understand to be reasonable contingency planning that can be afforded and can be constructed.
Okay, thank you for that. All right, so our next question here, the county is not meeting bacteria discharges under the Regional Water Quality Board permit and has not found solutions. This project can have elements to reduce bacteria if drainage infiltrates into soil backfill, excuse me, placed along soil cement slope. Why is soil backfill not used as part of the project to reduce bacteria discharges?
Yeah, so number one, there is soil backfill on the levee. The face of the river is armored with soil cement. In addition, although it's not specifically for treating bacteria, one element of the levee is we have a design for an infiltration gallery along the river side of the levee to treat stormwater flows. So there is some infiltration for stormwater flows incorporated into the design, and the back of the levee is made of soil.
Okay, thank you. And our next question is, what is the condition of the levee downstream from 101? How does the new part integrate with the older part? And I'm guessing that Mr. Fernandez is referring to SCR-3, unless he means further south of that, but I'll let our county staff jump in on that.
Sure, I'd say a couple of things and then let Angela and Gerard fill in on some of the details because they're more familiar with the levees downstream. But basically the SCR-1 levee improvements, they protect from Highway 101 upstream to Central Avenue drain. The SCR-3 levee, also on the Oxnard side, it protects, when completed, will protect between the Union Pacific Railroad downstream to beyond Riverpark. And in between those two is the Wagon Wheel development, which is again a separate flood protection measure. So long story short, each of the segments of levees, SCR-1, SCR-3, and the Wagon Wheel will protect their areas of development. And with that, I'll turn it over to Angela and Gerard if they have anything to add.
The only thing that I would add, this is Gerard, the only thing I would add is that while out of necessity, each of these projects is compartmentalized in terms of their ripeness, where they are in the design, where they are in the environmental approval, where funding is available for them. The rubric in which we're dealing with the planning and construction of all of these allows for and presumes seamless coordination. So there is seamless flood protection from Victoria Avenue at the downstream terminus of SCR-3 all the way up through underneath 101 and through SCR-1 up towards close to the Freeman diversion north of Central Valley, Central Avenue and the Sataquai Bridge. So ultimately that system, when complete, will be approximately an 8+ mile long levee system, providing protection against the entire south bank of the Santa Clara River and the northwest portions of the city of Oxnard shown on the respective maps.
Okay, thank you, Gerard. And was there anything you wanted to add to that, Angela, before we go to the next question?
No. Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you. All right. Our next question, is there a cost savings if the betterments are constructed now as opposed to incurring the need for a separate CEQA?
So I think there's always a presumption of an economy of scale when you have a larger project, because there's a contractor mobilized on site. They can incorporate additional work in more efficiently. So that potential is always there when the funding's there. In other words, if as we went through the betterment process, asking, that the betterments have a funding source for design and construction as well as long-term maintenance. Yeah, it would have been more cost efficient to incorporate those in to the design, but as Gerard has outlined earlier, it's not a cost that we can bear as we try to move forward to protect the citizens in the Riverpark neighborhood.
And Councilman Trent, if I could just chime in along the line, the theory is if you could package everything together, in theory, everything would be more efficient and more economical. But the problem is each of these elements is at different stages of its progression from concept to design, to engineering, to construction, to completion. For example, the city has a Santa Clara River Rail master plan, which was adopted in 2012, that conceptually defines what that trail will be across, in this case, SCR-1, or in other areas of the area, but doesn't necessarily yet have the design details that would support the investment of construction in that. So that piece is not yet completed for any trail, to my knowledge. And if city staff, if I've said anything untoward, please correct me, but I believe that to be true. So that's where that is at along the line. In the case of the SCR-3 levee, as you see, the first 3 reaches have been constructed. The CEQA document was approved years ago in 2016 for the full project levee along the line. We're dealing with the second phase of construction shown on this graphic in the Riverside flood wall, and Wagon Wheel is dealing with the others. Coordination of all of that has to happen, and they are separate projects. SCR-1 is at a much earlier stage of its development, maturity, design, for example, the CEQA meeting tonight. So yes, in an ideal world, if everyone had their ducks in line and there was coincidence and concurrence between where they were on the planning, design, and readiness to execute, that's where you would have optimal efficiencies. Having said that, given the cost of the SCR-1 levy, we have yet to come across a federal or state grant that would fund in one swoop a cost magnitude. So it's likely, we can never say for sure, but it's likely that even if we get approval of the design and approval of CEQA, its phase out will occur, or I should say its construction will occur as construction funding phasing becomes available and secured by watershed protection. And I think the same kind of dynamic will happen with any city bike trail project, any regional bike trail project, any construction project.
All right, thank you for that, Gerard and Kurt. All right, so our next question, it's actually a reference to something that was asked earlier. Mr. Danza's concern and question about the VC Watershed Protection District being allowed to spend 10% of any project on amenities. So why isn't VCWPD doing this?
Yeah, I'll start this and maybe Ansel and Gerard have something to add, but I don't really know where this statement comes from, in that it says any project we have, we spend 10%, or we're allowed to spend 10% on amenities. I know a couple of years ago after the fire, I completed an emergency project that was funded by NRCS. There was no money for amenities included in that.
And I'll jump in. So let me start again from the point that I raised. We have insufficient funding to operate and maintain our system. We do not have the complete funding to enhance it without state and federal grants. So it is a zero-sum game. Again, I'm not challenging Mr. Danza's statement I'm not aware where he's getting it from, but putting that aside, whether it's allowable or not, is it doable? And the mechanism of doability means that if we took out of our limited funding that we have available, it means that we can't do some other flood protection project, either a different levee in Oxnard, the Shumash Creek projects, what have you. We have to do this balancing act. We're not special in this regard. The city has to balance a variety of funding needs as well on these projects. And what really drives our ability to access the grant funding is design complete? Is CEQA complete? Are we ready to execute? Do we have the local match to secure, whether it's 25% or 50% or what have you? And putting those all together in the right sequence and the right time together is quite the undertaking. But unfortunately, that is the process in which we operate with the funding available for flood protection infrastructure, which is in our programmatic wheelhouse.
Okay, thank you.
I just wanted to say that Jim provided the reference later on in the questions. He says it comes from Ventura County Watershed Protection Act, California Water Code Appendix, Chapter 46, that the district shall have the following powers on page 19 in regard to any flood control, water conservation, or storm drainage facility or work of improvement for which bonds are hereafter voted under the provisions of this act. The proceeds of such bonds may be used for recreational use or beautification purposes authorized by the provisions of this section. However, in connection with any flood control or water conservation project in which the district participates in whole or in part, in no event shall the district expend funds, regardless from what source or sources derived, for the acquisition, construction, or installation of any recreational facilities or landscaping, or for the acquisition of lands or interest in lands for recreational or beautification purposes, the total amount of which exceeds 10% of the costs of construction of such flood control or water conservation project.
So you'll notice that provision relates to bonds. Bonds require voter approvals, as distinct from grants to fund projects. So presumably the authority is there for us to proceed with bonds for a project requiring voter approval.
Okay, thank you. And I think that's a great reference that was brought forward. And thank you for sharing that with everyone as well, Angela. And that may be something that we can all look into as a follow-up to this as well. Thank you for asking that, and thank you to the staff for answering it. Our next question says, single-purpose projects such as flood-only is a poor strategy for winning state grants. How is a flood-only project without a bike path or any multiple benefits expected to score well?
Yes.
Tran, let me tackle those. So it's difficult to say for future grants how, in a highly competitive environment, any given project will fare. But with respect to the local levy assistance program, we have done a fairly credible record. And in fact, we have been able to obtain state grant funding for all of these levy projects, which have had small elements related to the protection and enhancement of non-flood protection benefits. First of all, in the first round of the local levy assistance program, while Ventura County is 2% of the state population, we received 23% of the statewide total, including for funding of the initial design work for SCR-1. In the second round for SCR-1, which is currently funding this situation, we received 22% of statewide total with only 2% of the state population. And in the third point of the SCR-3 project that I mentioned earlier, the Coastal Watershed Flood Risk Reduction Program, we received 12% of the statewide total with only 2% of the population. So in the past, our projects have scored high, and we've approached actually getting 100% of what we've asked for the state. So that's helpful to at least to look at from the standpoint of our operating record. With respect to the enhancements related to the LLAP, whose funding, by the way, has not been renewed by the legislature in spite of many of our local agencies, both the City of Oxnard and ourselves, continuing to press the legislature to fund additional money for local levee assistance program grants that would be tailor-made for this type of project. We have been able to, the amount that the state provided for the potential for a recreation enhancement was 5% of the total. That is a very, very small amount of money, and it doesn't get you anywhere near building a bike trail of any length of a point in time. So while on the paper, the state grant says, well, if you plan this into your eventual levy plans, which we have, then we will give you up to 5% of the total grant that you've already received. That's on the order of tens of thousands of dollars. The Santa Clara River Trail Plan conceptual design that the city identified, the most recent cost estimate to do that 5-mile trail was roughly about a $7 million estimate in 2018 or 19. Now that can be changed based on the city changing its ultimate design and what the costs are. But just to give you an idea, the kind of incentive that the questioner is mentioning is a very, very small component of the overall cost of a bike trail project, and an even more smaller component of the overall cost of LLAP. And to not sound like a broken record, but to come back again, each one of these grants has required us to think carefully about how do we fold in non-flood protection benefits, but not at the cost of including vital flood protection benefits. And so until a grant program that is put forth by either the state or federal government could give us 100% funding for non-flood protection benefits, anything that was not picked up for that by that grant for those non-flood protection benefits would come from the expense of flood protection designated dollars.
All right, thank you for that, Gerard. And I think that's a great segue into the next question. Is there any funding available from the upcoming infrastructure bill? And I believe they're referring to the federal funding that is coming down.
Right. So I'll tackle this one. We don't, of course, know what the final version of it will be, let alone whether it will pass. The best information we have is while there is specific mention of water and sewer systems in the federal bills that are being considered, there is no precise mention of flood protection. So it's difficult to say whether there is any earmark anticipated or whether there will be any earmark practically designated. I will say in the state of California, we've migrated to something called the Regional Integrated Water Management Process. But in every one of those funding rounds, the piece of the total bonds issued by the state or the grants proposed to implement those bonds by the state for flood protection has been a poor orphan against other water resource related needs. That isn't a complaint or a whining, that's a reality. And so while we have consistently participated in all of those regional integrated water planning processes, the flood protection piece has not, in the last several rounds of statewide bonds, been anywhere near the needs to fund a flood protection infrastructure deficiencies such as the levee design project or rehab project we're talking about here.
Great, thank you very much. And at this point, I would like to invite our city staff to comment if there's any additional stuff they'd like to add about the infrastructure bill that we might be seeing that might have effect on this as well.
Tatiana Arnaud, city engineer. No, I mean, Gerard touched on this a little bit already, and they have all kinds of other infrastructure that is, you know, potentially going to be included in the final version of this bill, but I don't see anything that relates to these bike trails. And again, it goes back to the timing of all of this, we have to we have to wait until the actual levee improvements are funded before we can even request funding for these bike paths.
Okay, thank you for that.
And if I could just weigh in one more time on that
Yes, of
point.
course.
That is true for SCR-1, but as Angela indicated, SCR-3 is right for bike trail funding should such become available from Reaches 1 through Reach 3.
Great, thank you. And our next question is, have any additional non-flood protection funds for the bike trail been considered?
I'm not sure I understand the question. To the extent that the earlier answer that I gave you, that to do our basic projects, we basically have to get grant funding. And we use local zone money, which essentially is property tax money. We have a piece of the 1% ad valorem tax take, as does the city, as does the county, as do special districts and school districts. We use that as local match to leverage local funding for state and federal infusion. So if that's what the questioner is asking, the answer is yes, that's how we basically do any capital projects any longer. The days where property tax revenues would cover capital projects and operation and maintenance of these expensive flood protection projects are long gone. And so that's the best answer I can give if I understood at least the spirit of the question and the context of it.
Okay, thank you. Our next question, this is a major public works project that has a major impact on the local economy and local tradesmen. As tax dollars are being allocated for this project, how is the county and city considering local craftsmen for opportunities of employment? Is there conversations about local hiring clauses? Is there ideas about hiring disadvantaged residents into the trades for this? What about women, veterans, or students? How else can this project benefit the community other than flood control?
Yeah, this is a great question that it lends itself to the discussion about how local construction has a positive impact on local economy. But let me just start with the first is tax dollars are being, how is the county considering local craftsmen? Our projects, typically, we put them out for low bid under the California
Public
it's a public contract code. We take low bid. It's pretty simple. Contractors need to be bonded. Many times they're union, although they're not required to be. So the contractors themselves can come out of the area. When they do, like we have one in South Oxnard now, when they need labor, they pull it from the local union halls. And so in that way, it affects the local labor market. It has a positive effect on that. It talks about, let's see, as far as county and city considering local craftsmen for opportunities in employment, there's not a specific discussion about that right now. This may have some, how the grant funding comes in could have a bearing on how something like this would be implemented. Some have requirements for disadvantaged businesses or for women, minority-owned businesses, women-owned businesses, but those aren't necessarily. That means like the president or the people who run the company are minority or business owned. So I guess to kind of summarize an answer to this, in general, there'd be positive economic impact as far as a program for hiring veteran students and disadvantaged residents. There's not a specific program for that other than what construction companies or the unions may be implementing.
Councilman Turan, if I could just add to that. So it's almost a guarantee that since grant funding will be the major source for this, that prevailing wage requirements will be required. So that's almost 100% given. And then it depends on the specific nature of the federal and/or state grants with respect to additional preferences or accommodation for additional preferences. The Board of Supervisors last year considered requests by a number of labor unions to affect what is known as a project labor agreement. There was considerable debate and discussion and direction to the County Public Works Director to continue to research the issue under the guidelines that the then board gave him and bring that issue back to the board. I am unaware of where the County Public Works Director is on that process and when that will be coming back to the board. But at some point in the future, that policy discussion about is what the county doing now sufficient? Can we do other things? Can we do better things? Will come to the fore. So that's the best answer I can give you on that. But it's almost guaranteed that these major construction projects will have prevailing wage requirements and will reflect additional preferences that are embedded in the federal or state law governing the provision of those grant reimbursements to the Watershed Protection District.
Thank you for that. All right, our next question, and we're rounding out. We have only a handful of questions left. Let's see here. Are there other existing levees in the lower watershed that are also due for improvements? And how are capital flood protection projects prioritized?
I don't think that there are any other existing levees. SCR-3 is the most downstream levee that is going to be improved. And as far as how are capital flood protection projects prioritized, I think probably that's a question that Kurt can answer a little better.
Sure. And I think Gerard probably has some insights as well. Projects are scored on, it's through our advanced planning section. They have a ranking system in it. There's like capital projects and then there's maintenance projects, and maintenance projects are often things that just need to be fixed. And it's obvious that they need to be fixed. So there's not a lot of debate about it. Maybe just some discussion about how best to fix it. It does, quicker, faster, cheaper. For capital improvement projects, they get ranked on a criteria that includes like the flood protection, recreational opportunities. If there's, like we talked about earlier, if there's an economy of scale with other projects happening within the same area. And I think there's probably one or two areas I missed.
I think environmental impacts is one of them too. The degree of environmental impacts or the ability to permit the proposed solution is one. And the eligibility for grant funding might be another as well.
So let me just add to that. We have a rather vigorous and robust rubric by which we evaluate the ranking of capital improvement projects. By definition, levees, particularly ones that are of long distance that protect large populations, rank high because of the impact should those levees fail or not be present to the downstream populations protected. So in our capital improvement scheme, the levees that need to be certified and rehab to be certified rank very high, this being one. There are clearly levees on the Ventura River that are similarly positioned, VR1 being the other core built levee for Ventura. And so flood protection is important. Public safety is important. The readiness to execute the project. In other words, have we invested the time and money to do design engineering, geotech, borings, all of that preparatory work to and/or CEQA. That's often done predominantly on our dime up to a certain point, and then that facilitates readiness for that project to be executed. There's also community acceptance to projects factored into that. And then funding becomes sort of an accelerant if it's available that might add additional points to a particular project ranking should a grant program become available to us, that program or that project would be most beneficially be the most beneficial recipient of. So it's a combination of rubrics, science in terms of risk and funding and availability and readiness to serve, and then a funding grant source becomes an accelerant that might cause it to be done a little bit faster. But for that funding, we could not do it that fast. So hopefully that builds on what Angela and Kirk provided.
Okay, thank you very much. And our next question, what led to deciding to utilize a flood wall system from 101 down to SCR-3 rather than just extending the levee? Does this flood wall lend itself to future bike trail components, or a future bike trail component? Or in other words, would the flood wall system be a disconnect between future bike paths on SCR-1 and SCR-3?
So the reason that we selected a flood wall is because we don't have an existing earthen levee once you get to that big bend in Ventura Road.
Angela,
And
you go to the other chart that's got closer. There you go.
okay, so the earthen levee, I don't know if you could see my cursor.
We can.
Okay, so the earthen levee ends right around here. And we have all of this native habitat, riverine habitat here, which supports a number of endangered least Bell's vireo territories. And in order to build more earthen levee to protect this community, we would have to take out a lot of this habitat. So we wanted to have the smallest footprint we could. And so we chose to go with a flood wall with sheet pile driven vertically down into the ground to the scour depth. So also to continue along that vein of minimizing impacts to the river, we decided at this high point in Ventura Road to place a floodgate across the street and then continue the flood wall on the opposite side of the street, on the land side of the street, which would have no impacts to native riparian habitat. And then the Wagon Wheel developer is going to tie in to our flood wall on the north side of the Union Pacific Railroad. They will build their own, I think it's a combination embankment and flood wall, last I heard. I know their design has been in flux, and our permit section here is reviewing their design. And then I think there's going to be a street here, so they will put their own floodgate across that street, and then there will be more flood wall. Our SCR-1 levee starts up about here. So this portion of the road can flood. However, this was considered acceptable because there are no houses that would be lost in this area. And the floodgate, the purpose of the floodgate is to stop traffic from entering this area that could be flooded during a 100-year storm. I don't know if anybody wants to add anything else.
And it will accommodate a bike trail.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, that's right.
Yeah. And if I could just build on that, it looks counterintuitive, but there are reasons why it needs to be this way. First is there's absolutely no room for us to have an extension of a levee in the river bottom from the curve in Ventura Road. I can't use the pointer, but maybe Angela can as I'm speaking. From the curve in Ventura Road all the way up to where the Wagon Wheel project begins. Secondly, we are building protection on natural high ground topography. So we're using the natural topography as a natural basis on which to build the protection. That does require this area of Ventura Road to continue to be flooded occasionally, but it's a bathtub effect which is contained by the floodgate here and will be contained upstream at the SCR-1. And a decision was made that the protection from 101 through the UPR Railroad, which is another constraining factor, because in order to have a seamless levee to go from the curve of Ventura Road up through and under the railroad bridge to 101, the UPRR Railroad would essentially have required us, if they would have given us approval at all, to reconstruct their entire railroad bridge, and that would drive our difficult journey of getting funds to do levee projects to a stratospheric level of on our inability to do so. So we have to find a way to balance all these constraints: environmental, topographical, engineering, flood protection, public safety, transportation difficulties, mitigation along the line. Were we to have been approved to build a levee, if let's say everything I just said wasn't the case, and then we were allowed to build a levee in that area, upwards of 30% of the project cost would go for mitigation in those species if the regulatory agencies would have allowed us to do so. And both Angela and I can provide you attestation that the regulatory agencies would never have allowed us to do so.
Okay, thank you for that. And we have just 3 questions remaining here. The first of those is, and this is for our city staff, Mr. Yanez or Ms. Arno or Mr. Kolwitz. Can the city use ARP, American Rescue Plan funds, for the completed levee areas to build a bike path? And I believe she's referring to SCR-3.
Hi, Tatiana Arno, city engineer. So from looking at the master plan for the Santa Clara River, there wasn't a bike path necessarily proposed on top of SCR-3. Essentially, and I can put a link to that here in the Q&A for the answers. But basically, the bike path would run down along Ventura Road, and actually the Wagon Wheel development is also putting in a proposed multi-use path as part of their development heading south into the city. So to answer the question on that end, there wasn't necessarily a bike path on top of SCR-3 planned, unless my colleagues over at the county can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm just reading this plan over here. There's also another proposed bike path in that plan that would go down through actually South Bank neighborhood until it hits actually down to Vineyard Avenue and then even past that. So there could be potentially something that we can look into for ARP funds for those areas, but not necessarily on top of the levee.
All right, thank you. And did our colleagues from the county have anything additional for that as far as the current structure for the SCR-3 and a potential bike path?
The only thing we can add is it's ready and available for whomever to do whatever they can that's consistent with the county policy and does not compromise flood protection. And we would defer to the city's mastery of their plan. We're not equipped to give any additional information on that.
Okay, thank you for that. Is there any additional items for that question before we move on?
I had read that first question, can't we use these funds for SCR-3? And I had thought they were asking about the funding of the SCR-3 construction itself. So I put up this slide here that shows what the pending funding is. I don't know if anybody really wants to know, but we have a couple of grants in the works here. And we think that Department of Water Resources is going to provide a final funding notice at the end of this month for $3.125 million of coastal watershed flood risk reduction grant funding. That does not include a bike path, unfortunately. They were not funding bike paths, they were funding habitat enhancement. So in addition to, flood protection. So of the 3.125 million, $625,000 is going toward acquisition of parcels in the Fillmore area, just upstream of the Highway 23 crossing of the Santa Clara River. And the intention is to build upon the Sespe Cienega habitat complex that centers around the Fillmore Fish Hatchery. So it would include the acquisition and also some enhancement of that property. And then the remaining 2.5 million would fund construction of the SCR-3, final completion phase. So that's that grant. And then earlier this year in January, FEMA released the initial public notice on the right. And that, I believe, was also for 2.5 million. We've asked for a status update on that grant process and have not received one yet. So I'm not exactly sure where they're at. So at this point, we're just kind of guessing that we might be able to start construction within the next year or so. That's all. I'm not sure that really was what the question was asking, but I thought I'd go ahead and let folks know.
Yes, thank you for that.
And Councilman Turan, if I can just kind of high level, I know the purpose of this meeting was SCR-1, but we knew we need to be prepared to discuss SCR-3, obviously, along the line. So the current state of this is it's approximately a $12 million project to do the completion phase of the project. The current funding scheme includes a $1.3 million contribution by the Ravello developer through an agreement with the city when it's necessary to be, when this project is ready to go. So the City of Oxnard, via that funding means, is earmarked 1.3 million towards the cost. Angela has just discussed with you the two grants, one state grant for 2.5 million and one FEMA grant. So that leaves 6.3 or so million that will come from Zone 2 funds, property tax funds that are part of the 1% take for the Watershed Protection District. And it's that pot of money that is earmarked for flood protection projects, both capital and maintenance, that we have to balance against and make sure that we meet the needs as best we can. So that's in general the funding plan for the completion project for SCR-3, which, as I've indicated several times tonight, is further along its evolutionary stage than SCR-1, which is just beginning the completion of its project design and then the CEQA documentation, and is a much longer term and much more expensive flood protection project before any betterments are considered and ultimately secured and funded.
Great, thank you for that. Okay, our penultimate question here, or I think we have two more. Let's see. So is there a pro forma document showing per mile cost of a levee, top bikeway, and ongoing maintenance costs, benches every 1,000 feet, educational kiosks, other betterments or amenities? It's hard to talk about these things without knowing approximate costs and liabilities. If the pro betterment community had a menu, they could figure out a ballpark amount and give guidance to elected representatives and decision makers.
Kirk, you want to handle the basic construction, and I'll talk about the educational betterment piece in a minute.
Well, the question I'm reading is showing a cost per mile of the levee top bikeway. I would, the only really document I'm aware of is the one that the City of Oxnard put together some time back. I'm not aware of a pro forma document. I actually don't know what pro forma document means, but it sounds like it means a summary of costs for different items, like at a cafeteria. So I don't know if the City of Ox, go ahead.
Kirk, yeah, I can step in. So basically what the master plan shows is a very high level rough order of magnitude cost for what it would be on top of the SCR-1 levy, and that's, I believe, about $7 million. So not necessarily an itemized list, but just kind of high level in that sense.
Okay.
But nothing else has been put together.
And if I could transition then to the educational betterment. So part of the earlier discussion, the Rio School District's participation in funding conceptual design costs also included a preliminary cost estimate of the educational betterments shown there. And it's roughly between 2.3 and $2.9 million for those educational betterments as depicted in the slide that was included in the earlier presentation that you viewed. And so they did, as part of their contribution towards the conceptual design, do some preliminary cost estimates. And of course, those are always subject to refinement as the design progresses. The Corps gives a determination of yes, conditional yes or no, and then we'll see how that goes. So, and of course, these are all costs that are at a given point in time. And I've yet to encounter a project cost that takes long, that costs cheaper than when it's first started. But that's just the nature of the beast.
All right, thank you all for that. And just to round things out here, we have a statement for clarification, it looks like, and then that will lead to our final question for the evening. The statement is just to clarify for the recording from the stakeholder perspective in the betterments process. The stakeholders did not expect a bike path built before the levee reconstruction, just that it and other betterments would be supported and incorporated. It was accepted and understood that all aspects of the proposed reconstruction design would be going through the USACE 408 process. Also, in terms of stakeholders seeking funding for betterment operations and maintenance, it was impossible at the time and still for volunteer stakeholders to seek contributory funding at the point where there was no assurance of the design yet. Regarding the drafts contributed, the school district contribution was a shared stakeholder one financially supported by them, but was a joint stakeholder effort and proposal. Okay, so thank you for that. And this next question, as mentioned, grants and bond issues often encourage or require multi-benefit elements such as recreation and urban greening. How can Ventura County Watershed Protection District take advantage and optimize use of these funds if it is not used in the project scope or EIR?
Yeah, I think they are. I don't think the EIR is written to say that this is strictly a flood control project.
It's written to say that these things can be accommodated at a later time. And at that point, if you know, something comes along where other funding is available, an addendum to the EIR can be prepared to incorporate additional items like that.
Councilman Turan, if I could just chime in as well. So Angela is correct. We included descriptors of potential betterments in the EIR planning with the caveat that those were conditioned upon available funding and regulatory approval. So a conceptual placeholder exists in the EIR for the eventual future execution or implementation, I should say, of those potential betterments. Secondly, the slide that you're seeing currently shown is an excerpt from our stakeholder engagement rules of engagement. And I think when you look at that, and we can certainly discuss this further, but the clear rules of engagement at that point in time were, while we would consider those betterments, they would not advance until funding was determined and agreement for long-term operation and maintenance. And no stakeholder in that process, and it's difficult, and we certainly understand the difficulties because we ourselves face difficulties in getting grants for funding for basic flood protection in terms of timing. But that was the rule of engagement, that the betterments had to be self-funded and that there had to be a roadmap and an agreement for long-term maintenance. The only stakeholder that began to approach that was the Rio School District's contribution towards the conceptual design work that we did, which enabled us to at least propose to the Corps what might be a betterment that could potentially be included in the project. Later refinements to that, and as indicated, the Public Works Director in the fall of last year agreed that for purposes of including the 60% design submittal, that good faith financial contribution as well as partnership with the Rio School District, yes, in the broader context of the stakeholder discussions that we created through this process, but specifically referencing the school district's willingness and ability to contribute towards that, in his mind justified it's in their inclusion for purposes to see whether the Corps would approve them. And so that's why that's there. As I said, that does not preclude other betterments later being brought into the process. And as I indicated, as we all indicated, the county staff, this is a 10 to 15 year time horizon under the best of cases for this SCR-1 levy. That is not something people want to hear, but that is reality unless there is a major large scale infusion of capital to accelerate that process. If we get the design and the CEQA document completed, which was really the focus of tonight's meeting, the first step of getting the CEQA document completed.
Okay, thank you for that, Gerard. We have just two last bonus questions if we can get to that real quickly. One is from Gwyneth Doyle, who's from the Riverpark neighborhood, and the other is from Councilmember Perello. And those will be our final two questions for the evening. Why are the clay mining pit and water recharge areas not being considered in the watershed management and in a 1% flood event? They have a really close proximity to the SCR-1 levy.
Right. So as far as I know, two basins that were used during sand and gravel mining, SP milling was out there. One, a large deep one's referred to as the Woolsey Basin, and upstream or east of that is what it's called the Faro Basin. I know there's some interest by public agencies, not ours, for making use of the Woolsey Basin for my guess is this is for accumulating or capturing stormwater for later use. So there is interest in different agencies to do that with the Woolsey Basin, and Faro Basin is owned and operated by United Waters. So they are in the process of implementing some plans to use that basin for this purpose.
Thank you very much. And our final question, will dust with possible valley fever spores impact school activities?
So that will be analyzed in the environmental impact report, and it will probably be analyzed in the air quality section. And mitigation measures will be advanced to minimize the potential impact for that. It may also be analyzed in the hazard section of the EIR. So it will be addressed.
Great, thank you for that. All right, with that, I want to thank all of our folks from our Ventura County Watershed Protection Districts, and also thank our folks from the City of Oxnard. Thank you so much for coming out and being willing to answer these questions. Before we adjourn, I just want to share very quickly as a reminder for folks, any comments that you have regarding the CEQA, the scoping that we were talking about this evening, please go to the website that was shared on the flyer and has been shared in the items leading up to this meeting, and submit a public comment. If you wish to have your voice put into that, you do need to submit it as a written comment for this phase of where we are right now. So you can see on the website, we have July 27th as when the comments need to be received by, and you can email your comments to scr1info@ventura.org. All right, so I just wanted to share that. And with that, thank you all again. Thank you to Supervisor Levee and to Councilmember Perello as well for joining us. And again, thank you to our folks from the County of Ventura and the City of Oxnard for being here this evening. And thank you to all of our residents and constituents for coming out as well. And I think Councilmember Perello has something he'd like to say.
Yes, when they're discussing, I appreciate Supervisor Levee here and yourself and myself, but Supervisor Ramirez also has a piece of this action when we start talking about SCR-3, and I don't want people to forget that. And they need to hold their elected officials accountable. If they don't get the help that they need to hold their elected officials accountable, myself included. Appreciate the opportunity to be here and listen to this presentation. And ladies and gentlemen, the Ventura County Watershed has done a tremendous job to get as far as we are right now. It's a team effort, a lot of people, some you see in front of you and a lot of people behind the scenes. But without their work, we would not be where we are right now. I can tell you in 1969, I saw the bridges go out. I saw the river levee eaten up. The site that's Riverpark, called Riverpark now, there was never an idea for Riverpark. And 1969 was not a 100-year flood. It can happen and it does rain. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Perello. And I did see that there was staff from Supervisor Ramirez's office who had registered and attended tonight as well. Thank you to them for coming out. All right, so with that, we are adjourned. Thank you all again. I hope you have a great evening, and remember to get your written comments in by July 27th. Thank you again to everybody. Hope you have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Gabe,
Good
for
night,
putting this
everyone.
together.
Yes, thank you, everyone.